welcome to Cluster Tree Farm and Nursery. Today I'll be your garden coach and we're going to be going over sun tolerant and drought tolerant plants. We've got a bunch here, and first of all I'll say that drought tolerant is, there needs to be a caveat there that when you see in horticultural literature, books, whatever, they say this is a drought tolerant plant. They're referring to that plant once it's established. And so early on when you planted it, it's not going to be, even though these are low water plants, they're not a stick it in the ground and forget it kind of thing. You'll have to do occasional watering until they're established. That'll take possibly a year, maybe a little more. And of course, that's going to be influenced by the time of year. The most critical time, obviously, for watering will be in the heat of the summer, when the moisture is being blown away and evaporated away, and the plant is using more of it. The warmer it is and the more sun a plant gets, the more water that it's going to use relative for that plant. When it's cold and cloudy, it's not going to be using much water. It's not going to need as much. It's going to be relatively dormant. So we have, it's a range. We have low water plants, and then sometimes people come in and say, I want something that I don't have to water or be concerned about. The closest we have to a no water plant, and it's pretty close to it, is a prickly pear cactus. They're one that is, even in the summer, in the heat of the summer, and even right after you've planted it, it's not going to take much water. In fact, it's likely to be more in danger from overwatering than from drying out. It's really adapted to arid, situations. So you want to be cautious about watering one of these guys. Very little, and not very often. So on these, err on the side of, if you think it might need water, then probably don't water it. It's not going to need it very often. Of course, all its water, it's stored, so that's a survival technique, so it will get by without precipitation. And then the next step up on water needs would be the agaves. They're going to need occasional watering. Once they're established, they're on their own and they'll cope with it. But the first year, maybe a little longer, first summer, second summer, if it's extremely dry, they may need a little water to get them through. But once they're really established, they're going to be good on their own. The next step up from them would be the yuccas, which this one's a color guard, and they're a low water plant, but they're not a no water plant. So certainly the first season, or certainly during the hot times of the month, they're going to need occasional watering. They would, versus a shrub, typical shrub that you would have in your yard, they would take probably half what a typical shrub, maybe a third, until they're established. And then once they're established, they're pretty close to being on their own and being okay. They're not quite as tough and and need-free as an agave, but close. And then of course, the Texas sage, it would probably be the next step up in water needs. As you can see, it's kind of more of a shrubby thing than these guys. Of course, prickly pear and agaves have got real thick fleshy leaves that hold a lot of water. And then of course Yucca's pretty thin leaves, very tough. And then when you get to Texas sage, it resembles more a regular shrub. So it's a low water need, especially once it's established, but the first summer you have it in, it's gonna be a little more, maybe not quite as needy as a regular shrub, but in that ballpark. You know, possibly, and of course the weather we have, it can vary from day to day, even in the summer. If we have a day where, you know, the weather guy says the winds are going to be 15 to 25 miles an hour today, that's what I call a hair dryer day. If you have a recently planted Texas sage, probably by the end of that day, it might very well need a drink. Of course, when you give these type guys a drink, a 3-gallon container type plant, if you put you know, a couple gallons on it, like 2 milk jugs worth of water on it, it's good to go. No need to super saturate them. And of course, kind of in that league too, this is Santolina, kind of a low ground cover type, extremely sun and drought tolerant once it's established. Stays pretty low, 1.5 to 2 feet. Neat color and texture, kind of the silvery. And there's also a green variety that's also just as tough. And we have a few perennials here. This one is a Sedum spectabile, and this is a Autumn Joy variety. And you can see it's got a real thick, fleshy leaf, similar to the prickly pear. Not quite as thick, but once established, it's another one that, you know, your first season, keep it from just going dry, although it's pretty tough because you can see this guy's pretty dry. He's very dry, and he's okay, but they can survive that and tolerate it okay, but of course it dries out quickly because it's in this pot out in the sun. Once you get it in the soil, one of the reasons why you don't want to let it get super dry, even though it can tolerate it, is with a little more moisture, it's going to be growing. If it stays this dry, he's kind of got the brakes on. So once you get him in the soil, don't need to keep it wet, but an occasional watering, that's what will get this guy growing. And of course these are highly ornamental because these are the flower buds. It's kind of a reddish pink in the fall, highly attractive to butterflies, and looks neat with, you know, when this one blooms, it's going to look super neat with yuccas, any of the other guys here, and in some countries this one's known as the live forever plant. It lives for probably forever, but in the winter when it gets cold, this guy will die to the ground, but he'll come back. But before he dies to the ground, that'll probably be December or January, but all through the fall it's going to put on a really good show. Be a neat companion to a bunch of the other plants. And of course we've got some other companions. These are that are kind of in the shrub category. Help them out with water to get them through until they're established. Autumn sage, which comes in a bunch of different colors, kind of a purpley pink. This one's a red. They get 2 to 3 feet tall, evergreen, semi-evergreen, extremely heat and sun tolerant, and they will bloom from April or earlier, probably through November. So a neat plant, and they kind of bloom in waves. So these guys, I deadheaded them, gee whiz, not even a week ago, and all these buds and blooms have come on in that length of time. When they bloom out, you know, on a bloom stem like that, you can just trim those off, and like a lot of plants, when that flower goes, there's buds coming out on either side of it. And you don't have to be real detailed about deadheading it. You can just go through real quick, shear them off, and a week later you're going to have buds and blooms coming on again. A tough plant, a native plant to Texas, and has a kind of a neat aroma to the foliage, kind of like lantana. You love it or you hate it. I like it. But neat colors, tough plant. Of course, one of the ones that you see, this is a red yucca, and if sticky plants are not for you, this guy's not going to hurt. But very tough, low water use once established, profuse blooming. These guys will get, this clump will get about 3 feet wide, 3 feet tall, and of course you see these all over town. One of the nice things about these, they are certainly on the menu for hummingbirds. So when these guys are in bloom, we typically have them on the south of our building. Hummingbirds are a regular visitor on these. Very tough plant, and of course, not as common, and we don't get these all the time, but same thing in yellow, which just as tough, a different colored bloom. And of course, one of the things I like about this one is, if you want to do a group of colors, you might not necessarily like those two colors together, but that color with the yellow looks really neat. Now we'll kind of go through some of the individual plants we've got up here. You know, another neat companion plant for the agaves or cactus is the Mexican feathergrass. Very tough, and again, drought tolerant once it's established. You're going to get about 2 feet by 2 feet. It's neat because it's real wispy and a little bit of breeze. You also have some movement, and really goes well with any of the other items. You used to not see that very much. Now you see it all over the place. And of course, I already mentioned color guard, yuccas. And we have the other one. Color guard is yellow in the middle. Then we have bright edge, which is yellow on the outside, green on the inside of the leaf. Very tough plant. Artichoke, Texas sage. Got a couple varieties. This one's green cloud, kind of a grayish green. And then this guy here, more of a silvery type. This variety is called Renegade. And of course, these guys bloom sporadically through the season. In fact, one of the kind of odd things is if they're not blooming, if we have a thunderstorm come through, gives us a real dose of rain, within a week or so, they will be in bloom. Of course, I brought the Rosemary. Once established, they're drought tolerant, but I brought them for two reasons. They're, of course, neat full sun plants. They have a neat look in the landscape, and we have bigger varieties. This is a trailing variety. This is a new culinary variety. Gets like 1.5 feet by 1.5 feet. This is a trailing variety. Gets, you know, 2 feet, maybe a little more tall, but will get 3 or 4 feet wide. But also these guys, even though they are drought tolerant once established, they don't like to get really dry. You know, I showed you this guy. He was super dry and he's fine. He'll get a drink, he'll just carry on. If Rosemary gets that dry in a real sunny situation, it's gonna hurt the foliage. You can water it and it may not die, but if it gets really hot sun, probably never gonna look quite as good again. So, you know, and you know, they're not as drought tolerant as a lot of the other things. So keep an eye on those, and if you notice that they're not a dark green, they're kind of a lighter green or a grayish, that means they're drying out. And then if they've got new growth, you may see that, you know, they're kind of weeping over like that. That means, especially if they're in it's hot weather, give me a drink quick to preserve not only my life, but their appearance. And I'll mention a few of the individual agaves. This guy, is that too cool or what? And not surprisingly, that one's named Artichoke. You see where they got that name. And of course, as with all agaves, man, they can poke a hole in you. So I wouldn't have these around the playground. They're hardy. This one's going to get like 2 by 2, and that's kind of a neat looking one. And he can get big. You know, this guy can get up to 5 by 5, and that's a neat kind of bluish color on that guy. And I imagine he's going to get at least 3 to 4 tall and wide. This guy, hey, he'll get 6 feet plus. To be more than that's going to take some time. And a neat look and hardy. This guy, you can choose your pronunciation. That's a S-O-T-O-L. Sotol. Sounds good to me. Tough plant, a different look. And he does have teeth, but they're small. And then this guy, I think this is something this big can be cute. I'd say he's kind of up there in the running with this guy as far as cute is concerned. A neat color, a whole bunch of guys in there together. And Splendida. And he's, let's see what kind of size we can expect on him. 18 inches high and 3 feet wide. So he's not going to get out of control. But, zone 7 to 10 on top of that. And so he's a really hardy guy. We're zone 8, which our average winter temperature 10 to 20. And of course, as he's good to zone 7. As the numbers get smaller, that means it's a colder zone. Zone 7 is north of us. And for planting, these guys like drainage, so not a bad idea to have them in a somewhat elevated bed. And soil amendments of choice. You don't want soil amendments that help the whole water. You want the ones that help in drainage. So expanded shale, and you can kind of hear that's a gravel type thing, very porous. It doesn't disintegrate over time. So mix that in with the soil. It's going to be there forever. You can also put in some lava sand. It's a kind of a mineral thing, but also helps the texture. It's a real gritty, coarse sand. So shale would be the number one thing. Some lava sand would help too. Most important would be the shale, and you could also use those if you're doing these guys in pots. You know, I'd use something like, you can do planter's mix. We also have a succulent and cactus potting soil, but I would, even doing that, if I was doing it in a pot, I'd still add some of the, certainly of the shale to help make it a very porous situation, and that way you don't ever have to worry about a rot. And also when you do water, you get very good penetration. It holds enough water for the plant to get a drink, but won't stay soggy. And you could use, I didn't bring a bag out, but see, be careful. If you don't, see, if I mess with agaves or roses, I always end up bleeding. We have a Grower Special, which is a slow release synthetic fertilizer, which on these types of plants, they don't need a whole lot of fertility. You wouldn't need very much, but you're not shooting for these to grow fast. You're just wanting a little bit of fertility and some micronutrients to make them happy, and they'll be good to go. And of course, these guys, some of them, it might ultimately restrict their size a little bit to have them in a pot, but still you're going to have them close enough that they'll make a show. Just remember, some of them are pokey, and put them in a safe spot. And, we ran through everybody. I didn't bring over a Artemisia. Palace Castle is another silvery looking thing. You know, this guy's like 2 feet and maybe 2 feet wide. Palace Castle will get maybe 2.5 feet, 3 or 4 feet wide. A silvery foliage. This one's evergreen. The Artemisia, for the most part, the way our winters are going, is pretty close to evergreen. And if it does get nipped, it, you know, pops back. But it's a neat color and texture with these guys. And I guess that'll do. Thanks.